Have you ever heard tomorrow before it happened? Imagine turning on an old radio in the middle of a storm and hearing tomorrow's news. Not predictions, not guesses, real events that haven't happened yet. Most people would laugh until they heard their own name. Tonight's story begins in a forgotten town where one broken radio changed a man's life forever. October 1998. Heavy rain fell over the quiet town of Ash Creek, Colorado. The streets were empty, only the sound of rain echoed through the dark night. 32-year-old Daniel Carter had just inherited his grandfather's old farmhouse after his passing. The house had stood alone for nearly 50 years. Locals avoided it. Some believed strange sounds came from inside every stormy night. Daniel didn't believe in ghost stories. He was an electrical engineer. Logic was all he trusted. As lightning flashed across the sky, he carried dusty boxes into the living room. Inside one old wooden box, something caught his attention, an antique radio. Its dark wooden body was cracked with age. The metal tuning dial was covered in dust. A small brass plate read, Western Radio Company, 1954. Daniel smiled. He loved restoring old electronics. He placed the radio on a table near the fireplace. "There is no way this thing still works," he whispered. He plugged it into the wall. Nothing happened. He reached for the tuning dial. Suddenly, crack! A burst of static filled the room. The lights flickered. The wind outside grew louder. Then a calm man's voice slowly emerged from the static. "Good evening. This is tomorrow's evening news." Daniel froze. Tomorrow's news? He looked at the calendar. October 14th. The voice continued. "Tomorrow morning at exactly 8:42 a.m., a school bus will lose control near Miller Bridge. 7 people will survive. 1 child will not." Daniel frowned. This has to be some strange recording. Before he could touch the radio again, the voice whispered one final sentence. "Daniel, don't leave your house tomorrow." The radio suddenly went silent. Outside, another bolt of lightning lit up the empty road. Daniel stared at the radio. For the first time in years, logic had no answer. The next morning, Daniel barely slept. The strange broadcast echoed in his mind all night. Tomorrow morning, 8:24 a.m. He kept telling himself it had to be a prank. An old radio couldn't predict the future. At 8:30 a.m., Daniel made coffee and looked outside. The rain had stopped. The town looked peaceful. Then, at exactly 8:42 a.m., the silence shattered. Sirens screamed across Ash Creek. Police cars raced toward Miller Bridge. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. He turned on the television. Breaking news! A school bus has crashed near Miller Bridge. Daniel froze. The reporter continued, 7 children survived. 1 child has sadly lost their life. Every single word matched the radio broadcast. Daniel couldn't breathe. His hands began shaking. No, this isn't possible. Without thinking, he grabbed his truck keys and drove toward Miller Bridge. Police had blocked the road. Ambulances surrounded the wreckage. Parents cried behind the barricades. Daniel quietly stepped back. The radio. That evening, he returned home before sunset. The old farmhouse felt colder than ever. The antique radio sat silently on the wooden table. As the clock reached exactly 9 p.m., crack! The radio turned on by itself. Static filled the room. Then the same calm voice returned. "Good evening. This is tomorrow's evening news." Daniel slowly sat down. This time, he was listening. The voice continued. "Tomorrow, at exactly 6:15 p.m., a fire will destroy the old library." Daniel grabbed a notebook. He wrote every word. Then the voice suddenly paused. For the first time, it spoke directly to him. "Daniel, you tried to leave today. Tomorrow, don't try to change what you hear." The radio went silent again. Outside, another storm began rolling toward Ash Creek. Daniel stared at the notebook in his hands. One question refused to leave his mind. If the radio knew tomorrow, who was speaking from the other side? To be continued. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He wasn't going to sit back and watch another tragedy happen. If the radio could predict the future, maybe the future could still be changed. He drove straight to the Ash Creek Public Library. It was a quiet brick building that had stood in the center of town for more than 80 years. Inside, the elderly librarian smiled politely. "Can I help you?" Daniel hesitated. How could he explain that an old radio had warned him about a fire? Instead, he quietly said, "I think you should close the building early today." The librarian laughed softly. "That's a strange thing to say." Daniel walked through every room. He checked the electrical panels, the basement, the storage room. Everything looked perfectly normal. There was no smell of smoke, no damaged wires, nothing. At 5:30 p.m., Daniel refused to leave. He sat outside the library, watching every window. 5 minutes passed. 10, 20, nothing happened. For the first time, he began to believe the radio had finally been wrong. Then, at exactly 6:15 p.m., boom! A violent explosion echoed beneath the building. Flames burst through the basement windows. Within seconds, the entire first floor was filled with fire. People screamed. Firefighters rushed toward the scene. Daniel stood frozen. He had been there the whole time. Yet, he never saw what caused it. As the fire spread, one firefighter ran out carrying an old metal box recovered from the basement. The box crashed onto the ground. Its lid burst open. Inside, hundreds of old newspaper clippings scattered into the wind. One yellowed newspaper landed at Daniel's feet. Its date stopped him cold. October 15th, 1998. Tomorrow's date. But the newspaper looked decades old. The headline read, "Local engineer disappears after strange radio discovery." Below the headline was Daniel's photograph. His hands began shaking before he could read another word. A powerful gust of wind carried the newspaper away. That night, Daniel rushed back to the farmhouse. The radio was already on. Static filled the room. Then the familiar voice whispered, "You're reading tomorrow." But someone else already lived it. Daniel's blood turned cold. If someone had lived this before, who were they? And why did the newspaper already know his future? To be continued. Daniel couldn't sleep. The newspaper, the fire, the voice, none of it made sense anymore. If someone had disappeared because of this radio, Daniel needed to know who had built it. The next morning, he drove to the Ash Creek Historical Museum. It was the oldest building in town. Dust covered nearly every shelf. An elderly historian named Margaret welcomed him. Daniel carefully placed the antique radio on her desk. The old woman's smile disappeared instantly. She whispered, "I never thought I'd see this radio again." Daniel leaned forward. "You know this radio?" Margaret nodded slowly. It belonged to a scientist named Arthur Weston. She opened an old leather journal. Inside were faded black and white photographs. One photograph showed Arthur Weston standing beside the exact same radio. Another photograph shocked Daniel. Arthur looked almost identical to him. The same face, the same eyes, the same expression. Daniel whispered, "That's impossible." Margaret turned another page. There were rumors. Arthur wasn't trying to build a radio. He was trying to listen to time itself. Daniel felt cold. He disappeared in 1954. No body was ever found. Margaret handed Daniel an old key. On the tag were strange words. "All basement laboratory," she quietly said. His laboratory still exists beneath the old Weston factory. That evening, Daniel drove to the abandoned factory outside town. Broken windows, rusted machines, silence. Using the old key, he unlocked a hidden steel door beneath the factory floor. The stairs led deep underground. As Daniel switched on his flashlight, he found dozens of strange machines covered in dust. Blueprints covered the walls, old clocks, electrical coils, hundreds of radio parts. Then he saw a message written across the wall in large faded letters. "If you can read this, you are already too late." Daniel's heartbeat accelerated. Suddenly, behind him, a radio switched on by itself. The familiar voice echoed through the darkness. "Welcome back, Arthur." Daniel slowly turned around. The underground laboratory was empty. No one was there. Yet someone had just called him by another man's name. To be continued. Daniel slowly stepped deeper into the underground laboratory. The old radio continued producing soft static. Then silence. The voice was gone. Rows of dusty machines stretched into the darkness. Every clock in the laboratory showed the same time, 8:42. The exact time the school bus crashed. Daniel walked toward a large steel desk. On top of it rested dozens of notebooks. Each one was marked with a different year. 1944, 1968, 1985, 1998. He opened the notebook marked 1998. Inside, someone had written today's date. Every event that had already happened was listed perfectly. The school bus, the library fire, even Daniel finding the underground laboratory. His hands trembled. He quickly turned the page. Tomorrow's date. The next prediction read 11:30 p.m. The laboratory door will never open again. Daniel looked back toward the staircase. The heavy steel door slammed shut by itself. Bang! He ran toward it. Locked. No matter how hard he pushed, it wouldn't move. Suddenly, all the old radios inside the laboratory switched on together. Hundreds of voices filled the room. Some whispered, some cried, some screamed. Then every voice became one. "Arthur, you finally returned." Daniel covered his ears. "No, my name is Daniel." The voices ignored him. A dusty tape recorder suddenly started playing. Arthur Weston's voice echoed through the room. "If you're hearing this, the experiment succeeded. Time can hear us, but it never forgets us." Daniel stared at the recorder. Arthur continued, "The radio doesn't predict tomorrow. It remembers another timeline." Daniel felt his heart stop. Another timeline. Before he could think, a hidden projector flickered to life. On the wall appeared moving images. Daniel saw himself walking through the laboratory. But something was wrong. The man on the screen wasn't wearing today's clothes. He looked over. His beard was longer. His face was tired. Then the older Daniel looked directly into the camera and whispered, "Don't trust the next broadcast." The projector suddenly exploded. Darkness swallowed the laboratory. Only the old radio remained glowing in the silence. To be continued. The laboratory was silent again. Only the antique radio continued to glow. Daniel slowly walked toward it. This time, there was something different. A small red light blinked beneath the tuning dial. It had never been there before. As he reached out, the radio switched itself to another frequency. No static, no voice, only a slow heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Then a woman's voice whispered, "Daniel, you've been listening to the wrong station." He froze. "What?" The voice continued. "The broadcasts you've heard, they're only echoes. The real signal is still waiting." Suddenly, an old map slid out from beneath the radio. It showed Ash Creek. But something was wrong. There was a road that didn't exist anymore. At the end of that road, one location was circled in red, Weston Transmission Tower. Daniel had never heard of it. He searched the laboratory. Inside an old filing cabinet, he found Arthur Weston's final notebook. The last page contained only one sentence. "If the tower still broadcasts, time can never heal." Lightning shook the underground laboratory. The lights flickered. Every radio in the room suddenly spoke together. "Destroy the tower." Then another voice interrupted. "No, protect it." The laboratory fell silent again. Two voices, two completely different warnings. Daniel didn't know which one was telling the truth. He grabbed the notebook, the old map, and the antique radio. As he climbed the stairs, the massive steel door slowly unlocked by itself. Outside, the storm had become even stronger. Far beyond the trees, a faint red light blinked at the top of a distant mountain. Daniel looked at the map. The light matched the exact location of Weston Transmission Tower. Then the antique radio whispered one final sentence. "Hurry, tomorrow night. The final broadcast begins." Daniel stared toward the mountain. For the first time, he realized this story had never been about predicting the future. It had always been about changing the past. To be continued. The storm grew stronger with every passing minute. Rain hammered against Daniel's windshield as he drove toward Weston Transmission Tower. The road no longer appeared on any modern map. Trees covered both sides. The pavement was cracked. It looked as though no vehicle had traveled there for decades. Yet, fresh tire tracks stretched ahead of him. Daniel stopped the truck. Someone else had come before him. He picked up the antique radio. It was silent. For the first time, the radio wasn't speaking. Only the sound of rain filled the night. After nearly 30 minutes of walking, the tower finally appeared. It stood nearly 300 feet tall. Rust covered every beam. Old warning lights blinked red against the storm. Beneath the tower sat a small concrete control building. Its heavy steel door was already open. Daniel stepped inside. Dust covered every machine. Ancient radio transmitters lined the walls. In the center of the room, a single monitor suddenly turned on by itself. Static filled the screen. Then a live camera appeared. Daniel froze. The camera wasn't showing the room. It was showing tomorrow. He watched himself standing exactly where he was now. But tomorrow's Daniel looked terrified. The screen crackled. Future Daniel looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, you're already too late. Suddenly, the future version of Daniel turned toward the tower window. A blinding white light exploded across the screen. The transmission ended. Every machine inside the control room powered on at once. The entire tower began shaking. The antique radio finally spoke again. "This is the final broadcast." A deep mechanical voice echoed through the building. "Timeline synchronization begins in 60 seconds. Daniel's heartbeat raced. A large countdown appeared on every monitor. 60, 59, 50. Outside, the red warning lights changed to brilliant white. Lightning surrounded the tower. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Daniel looked around desperately. There had to be a way to stop it. Then he noticed one final switch hidden beneath the main transmitter. A faded metal label read, "Reset Timeline." Daniel reached toward it. His hand stopped only inches away. If he pulled the switch, would he save the future or erase his own existence forever? To be continued. The countdown continued. 30, 29, 28. The entire control room shook violently. Daniel stared at the red switch. Reset timeline. Every instinct told him not to touch it. But every warning, every prediction, every impossible event had led him here. The antique radio suddenly crackled. Then Arthur Weston's voice returned, "Daniel, the future you're trying to save doesn't belong to you." Froze. What does that mean? Static filled the room. Then another voice answered. His own voice. Older, tired, broken. "You've already done this before." Daniel stepped back. No. The monitor flickered. Images appeared across every screen. Daniel watched dozens of different timelines. In one, the tower exploded. In another, the town disappeared. In another, Daniel himself vanished without a trace. Then he saw something impossible. A timeline dated 1954. Arthur Weston standing inside the same control room, holding the same antique radio. Standing beside him was Daniel, the same face, the same eyes, the same man. Daniel's mind raced. Arthur hadn't built the radio alone. Somehow, Daniel had already been there. The countdown continued. 15, 14, 13. The building trembled. Outside, white lightning covered the entire sky. Arthur's voice echoed once more. The radio never predicted the future. It created it. Suddenly, the antique radio opened by itself. Inside, Daniel discovered a hidden photograph. The picture showed Arthur Weston and Daniel standing together in 1954. On the back of the photograph were 4 words. Time always remembers. The countdown reached 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8. The tower screamed with electrical energy. Every light turned white. Daniel looked at the switch. There was no more time. Future Daniel's warning echoed inside his mind. You're already too late. But Daniel finally understood. The future wasn't the enemy. The radio was. Without hesitation, he grabbed the antique radio and smashed it against the control panel. Crash! The room exploded with blinding white light. Every monitor shattered. Every machine stopped. The countdown vanished. Then silence. Absolute silence. For the first time since this nightmare began, the voices were gone. The storm disappeared. The tower stood motionless. Daniel slowly opened his eyes and realized something had changed. Something very important. The photograph in his hand was gone. Arthur Weston's name no longer appeared anywhere in the building. It was as if he had never existed. But one question remained. If Arthur Weston had been erased, who had sent the very first broadcast? To be continued. Morning came quietly. For the first time in days, Ash Creek felt normal. The sky was clear. The birds were singing. Daniel stood outside the ruined transmission tower. Everything looked ordinary, almost. The tower was still standing, but every radio antenna had vanished. It was as if they had never existed. Daniel smiled for the first time. Maybe it was finally over. Then his cell phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. No one spoke, only soft radio static. Then a little girl's voice whispered, "Mr. Carter, you forgot one broadcast." The call ended. Daniel immediately checked his phone. There was no missed call, no record, nothing. Suddenly, a black government SUV stopped beside the tower. Two men wearing dark suits stepped out. Neither showed a badge. One handed Daniel a thin envelope. "We've been looking for you." Daniel frowned. "Who are you?" The older man replied calmly, "Department 42. We monitor impossible events." Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a classified photograph. It showed Arthur Weston standing beside another man. Daniel's heart stopped. The second man wasn't him. It was someone much older. Someone wearing the exact same clothes Daniel had worn yesterday. The date beneath the photograph read October 18th, 2036. Daniel whispered, "That's impossible." The younger agent looked directly into Daniel's eyes. Arthur Weston didn't invent time communication. He stole it. Daniel felt cold. "From who?" The older agent answered. "From you." Silence. Daniel couldn't breathe. The agent continued. 16 years from now, you'll build the first real-time transmitter. Arthur only found your work." Daniel stepped backward. "So, none of this has happened yet?" The older man shook his head. "No, it's already happening." He pointed toward the mountain. Daniel slowly turned around. Far away, another transmission tower stood on a distant ridge. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Its warning lights slowly turned red. Then Daniel heard it again. Static, not from the sky, not from the tower, from inside his jacket pocket. He reached inside. The antique radio was back, completely restored, as if it had never been destroyed. Its speaker crackled. One final sentence echoed softly. "Tomorrow's final caller is waiting." Daniel stared silently at the radio. He finally understood. Destroying it had never been enough. To be continued. The wind stopped. The forest became completely silent. Daniel stood motionless, holding the antique radio. The tiny speaker crackled one last time. Then a calm voice spoke. "Daniel Carter, thank you for answering every broadcast." A cold chill ran through his body. "Who are you?" For several seconds, only silence. Then the voice finally answered. "I am Tomorrow." The radio suddenly became warm in Daniel's hands. The surrounding world slowly faded away. The mountains, the trees, the road, everything disappeared into a blinding white light. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was standing inside an enormous room. There were no walls, no ceiling, only thousands of floating antique radios stretching endlessly into the darkness. Each radio was quietly playing someone's future. Some people laughed, some cried, some screamed. Daniel slowly walked forward. At the center of the room stood an old man. His hair was completely white. His face looked strangely familiar. The old man smiled. "You finally made it," Daniel whispered. "Who are you?" The old man replied, "I am you." Daniel froze. The old man continued, 40 years from now, I built the first machine that allowed people to hear tomorrow. I believed it would save lives. But every warning changed history. Every change created another timeline. The machine became impossible to stop. Daniel looked around. So, the radio was never haunted? The old man shook his head. No, it was only carrying echoes from broken futures. He pointed toward one final radio resting on a stone pedestal. This is the first broadcast. If no one answers it, everything ends. Daniel slowly approached the radio. Its speaker came alive. The familiar voice echoed once more. "Good evening. This is tomorrow's evening news." Daniel suddenly realized something terrifying. This was the exact broadcast he had heard on the very first night. Time had come full circle. The old man smiled sadly. There has always been one listener, and there has always been one broadcaster. Daniel looked at him. Who sends the first broadcast? The old man gently placed the radio into Daniel's hands. You do. Silence filled the endless room. Daniel slowly closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. Then, for the very first time, he spoke into the microphone. Good evening. This is tomorrow's evening news. At that exact moment, far away, back in October 1998, a younger Daniel, sitting alone inside the old farmhouse, heard the broadcast for the very first time. The loop had begun again. The old man slowly disappeared, one by one. Every floating radio switched off. Darkness covered everything. Only one sentence remained. Some futures cannot be escaped. They can only be remembered. In October 14th, 1998, rain fell across Ash Creek once again. Inside the lonely farmhouse, a younger Daniel Carter slowly reached toward an old wooden radio. Exactly as before, the radio crackled. A calm voice echoed through the room. Good evening. This is tomorrow's evening news. But this time, something was different. The voice wasn't Arthur's. It wasn't a stranger's. It was Daniel's own voice. Years later, after everything, after every timeline, after every sacrifice, the loop had finally revealed its secret. Daniel wasn't only the listener, he had always been the broadcaster, far beyond time. Inside the endless room of radios, the older Daniel sat alone before thousands of silent receivers. Every time someone somewhere discovered one of Arthur Weston's forgotten radios, another future began. Another timeline was born. Another choice was made. The machine no longer belonged to one man. It belonged to time itself. Back in Ash Creek, the younger Daniel looked out the farmhouse window. Lightning flashed across the sky. He whispered, "Oh, why does this feel familiar?" For a brief second, he thought he saw an older man standing outside in the rain. Then, the figure disappeared. Miles away, the abandoned Weston transmission tower stood silently beneath the storm. Its warning lights never turned on again. Yet, deep underground, one forgotten radio suddenly crackled. A tiny red light blinked once, then twice. Then, a child's voice softly whispered, "Oh, who's listening tomorrow?" Silence. The screen slowly faded to black. One final sentence appeared. Every ending is someone's beginning. Horace. The end, October 17th, 2003, at exactly 9:15 p.m. Clarus, train 407 departed Union Station in Chicago. Its destination was Denver. There were 186 passengers on board. Families, business travelers, college students, and one quiet man named Ethan Carter. Nothing seemed unusual. The conductor checked every ticket. The train slowly disappeared into the cold autumn night. No one knew. None of those passengers would ever arrive. Around midnight, train 417 entered Black Ridge Tunnel. Totem, a tunnel that stretched beneath the Rocky Mountains. The tunnel was only 6 miles long. Normally, it took less than 7 minutes to pass through. But that night, the train never came out. Railway operators waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, nothing. The emergency control center immediately contacted the engineer. No response. The radio was silent. The GPS signal disappeared. It was as if the entire train had simply vanished. By sunrise, police, firefighters, and rescue teams surrounded both ends of the tunnel. They searched every inch. No wreckage, no smoke, no damaged tracks, nothing. It was impossible. A train carrying 186 people had disappeared without leaving a single clue. Within hours, the FBI took control of the investigation. News helicopters filled the sky. Reporters called it America's greatest railway mystery. Weeks turned into months. Months became years. Despite one of the largest searches in U.S. history, Train 417 was never found. The case slowly faded from the headlines. People stopped talking about it until 20 years later, on a rainy evening, a lone man walked into a small train station in Colorado. His clothes looked old. His train ticket was dated October 17th, 2003. The station clerk smiled politely. "Sir, can I help you?" The man looked confused. He quietly asked, "Has train 417 arrived yet?" The clerk stared at him, then looked at the ticket. His face turned pale, because the man standing in front of him was Ethan Carter, one of the 186 passengers who had disappeared 20 years earlier, and he hadn't aged even one day. To be continued. The station clock couldn't move. He stared at the old train ticket in Ethan Carter's hand. October 17th, 2003. It looked real. The paper was faded. The ink had aged, but the man holding it hadn't. The clerk slowly asked, "Sir, where have you been?" Ethan looked confused. "I've been on train 417. It should have arrived a few minutes ago." The clerk's face turned pale. "A few minutes? That train disappeared 20 years ago." Silence. Ethan laughed nervously. "That's impossible. I just left Chicago last night." The clerk quickly called the police. Within 15 minutes, 2 officers arrived. They asked Ethan simple questions. "What year is it?" 2003. "Who's the president?" George W. Bush. The officers exchanged nervous glances. Every answer Ethan gave belonged to 20 years earlier. Soon, the FBI arrived. The same agency that had spent 2 decades searching for train 417. They immediately took Ethan to a secure federal facility. Doctors performed every medical test imaginable: blood tests, brain scans, DNA analysis. The results shocked everyone. Ethan's body was biologically 34 years old, not 54. His fingerprints matched the missing passenger records from 2003 exactly. There was no doubt. This was the same Ethan Carter who had vanished 20 years earlier. But the biggest mystery came during the interview. An FBI agent placed an old newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Train 417 missing, 186 passengers presumed dead." Ethan stared at it. His hands began to shake. "No, this can't be real." Then he whispered something that made the entire room fall silent. "There was one more passenger." The agent frowned. "The official list says 186. Ethan slowly shook his head. "No, there were 187. The room became silent. The FBI checked the original passenger manifest again. It still listed only 186 names. No missing ticket. No extra seat. No evidence. Yet Ethan looked directly at the agents and quietly said, "I spoke to him. He told me, when the train stops, don't get off." The room fell completely silent. One young FBI agent slowly asked, "Who was he?" Ethan looked toward the dark window. His voice became almost a whisper. "I never saw his face, but he knew the train wasn't going to Denver." To be continued. The Last Passenger. Part 3. The Impossible Journey. The interrogation room fell silent. No one spoke. Every FBI agent stared at Ethan Carter. The mysterious passenger had no name, no ticket, no face. Yet Ethan remembered every word he had said. "When the train stops, don't get off." Agent Rebecca Hayes slowly leaned forward. What happened after that? Ethan closed his eyes. His hands began to tremble. "I fell asleep. When I woke up, the train wasn't moving anymore. The room grew quiet. It was completely silent. No engine. No voices. Nothing." He slowly continued. "I looked outside the window. There were no mountains. No cities. No tracks. Only endless white fog." The agents exchanged worried glances. Ethan whispered, "It looked like the train wasn't on Earth anymore." A cold chill spread through the room. He remembered passengers leaving their seats. Some walked toward the doors. Others looked outside in confusion. Then the train doors slowly opened by themselves. Outside, there was only thick white mist. One man stepped off first. The moment his foot touched the ground, he disappeared. Not exploded, not burned. Simply gone. Another passenger screamed. Panic spread through the train. People rushed toward the exits, one after another. They vanished into the white fog. Within minutes, half the train was empty. Then Ethan remembered the faceless passenger. He was still sitting calmly in the last seat. Without looking up, he quietly said, "They chose the wrong door." Ethan froze. "What do you mean?" For the first time, the mysterious passenger slowly stood. He pointed toward the opposite end of the train. "There is only one passenger who can leave alive." Before Ethan could ask another question, the lights inside the train suddenly went out. Complete darkness. Then a deafening train whistle echoed through the silence. When the emergency lights turned back on, the faceless passenger was gone. Only his black hat remained on the empty seat. Ethan looked around. The entire train was now empty. He was completely alone. Now to be continued. The black hat lay on the seat. The mysterious passenger had vanished. Ethan slowly picked it up. It was ice cold. Then he heard footsteps. 1, 2, 3. But the train was empty. Ethan, a voice whispered behind him. He turned around. No one. The emergency lights flickered. The train suddenly started moving again. But something was wrong. The windows no longer showed white fog. Outside, there was a city, a massive city, towering skyscrapers, flying vehicles, giant digital billboards glowing across the skyline. Nothing looked familiar. Ethan pressed his face against the glass. "This isn't Denver," a metallic voice echoed through every speaker. "Welcome to year 2043. His heart nearly stopped. No, this can't be happening. The train slowed to a stop. The doors opened. This time, there was no fog. There was a modern train station filled with hundreds of people. Everyone wore strange clothes. Small drones floated above the platforms. Digital signs displayed a date. October 18th, 2043. One young woman looked directly at Ethan. Her face turned pale. She slowly whispered, "It's really him." Within seconds, government security officers surrounded the train. None of them looked surprised. It was as if they had been waiting for him. One officer stepped forward. He smiled. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter. We've been expecting you for 20 years. Ethan couldn't speak. The officer handed him a small envelope. On the front, only 3 words were written. "Open in 2003. Ethan stared at the envelope. Before he could ask a single question, a deafening train whistle echoed once again. The station, the people, the futuristic city. Everything disappeared. The train began moving backward through complete darkness. Ethan looked down. The envelope was still in his hand, and suddenly it began to glow. Now to be continued. The envelope glowed brighter with every passing second. Ethan stared at it. His name was written across the front. The handwriting looked familiar, very familiar. With trembling hands, he slowly opened it. Inside was only one photograph. It showed train 417. But something was wrong. The train wasn't inside Black Ridge Tunnel. It was floating above the clouds, as if the tracks continued through the sky. On the back of the photograph, 5 words were written. "Don't trust the conductor." Ethan's heart pounded. The conductor? At that exact moment, a loud knock echoed through the train. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was walking down the empty aisle, slowly, one step at a time. Ethan looked toward the door. The train conductor appeared, perfectly dressed, neat uniform, golden pocket watch, warm smile, exactly as Ethan remembered him 20 years earlier. The conductor tipped his hat. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." Ethan stepped backward. I watched you disappear." The conductor smiled. "No, you watched everyone else disappear." The lights flickered for one brief second. The conductor's face changed. His eyes became completely black. His smile stretched far wider than any human smile could. Then everything returned to normal. The conductor calmly held out his hand. "May I have your ticket?" Ethan looked down. His faded 2003 ticket was still in his pocket. Then he remembered the message. "Don't trust the conductor." Instead of handing over the ticket, he slowly stepped away. The conductor's smile disappeared. The temperature inside the train suddenly dropped. His voice became cold. If you refuse, you cannot leave. Suddenly, every empty seat around Ethan filled with silent passengers. Dozens of people. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They simply stared at him, waiting. The conductor took one slow step closer. His pocket watch began ticking louder. Tick, tick, tick. Then he whispered, "You've already made this journey before." Ethan froze. "What did you say?" The conductor leaned closer. "You just don't remember it yet." The train whistle screamed through the darkness, and the lights went out once again. To be continued. Darkness covered the train. The ticking pocket watch stopped. Silence. Then a single red emergency light flickered on. Ethan slowly opened his eyes. The conductor was gone. So were the silent passengers. Only the old train remained. Then a metallic voice echoed through the speakers. "Passenger Carter, proceed to car 13. Ethan frowned. Train 417 only had 12 passenger cars. There had never been a car 13. Yet, as he looked down the aisle, a brand new door had appeared. Above it, a rusted metal sign read, "Car 13. The door slowly opened by itself. A freezing wind rushed out. Ethan stepped inside. The carriage was unlike anything he had ever seen. There were no passenger seats, only hundreds of old suitcases. Every suitcase had a name tag. Some names belonged to the missing passengers. Others belonged to people Ethan had never heard of. Then he saw one suitcase that made his blood run cold. Ethan Carter. He slowly opened it. Inside, he found his own wallet, his watch, his driver's license, and a newspaper. The headline read, "Train 417 passenger dies during rescue operation." The date, October 18th, 2003. Ethan whispered, "I died?" Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind him. He turned around. The conductor stood at the entrance of car 13. This time, he wasn't smiling. He quietly said, "Every suitcase belongs to someone who never truly left this train." Ethan held up the newspaper. "So this is my future?" The conductor slowly shook his head. "No, this is your past." Before Ethan could speak, every suitcase suddenly snapped open. Hundreds of personal belongings spilled across the floor. Photographs, letters, children's toys, wedding rings. The entire carriage filled with soft whispers. Then every voice spoke together. "Help us remember." The train violently shook. The lights turned deep crimson. At the far end of car 13, one final door slowly unlocked. Above it, a glowing sign appeared. "Engine room." The conductor looked directly into Ethan's eyes, then whispered one sentence. That's where the real journey began. To be continued. The glowing sign above the door read, "Engine room." Ethan had only one choice. He slowly pushed the heavy steel door open. It creaked loudly. Inside, the room was enormous, far larger than it should have been. Thousands of gears turned silently. Ancient steam engines stood beside futuristic machines that seemed impossible to exist. Blue electricity flowed through enormous glass tubes. At the center of the room, a single locomotive engine slowly pulsed like a living heart. Thump, thump, thump. Every beat shook the entire train. Ethan stepped closer. He suddenly noticed someone standing beside the engine. An old engineer wearing a black railway uniform. His face was hidden beneath a worn cap. Without turning around, he spoke. "I've been waiting for you." Ethan's voice trembled. "Who are you?" The engineer smiled. "The first passenger." A cold chill ran through Ethan's body. "The first passenger." The engineer nodded. "I boarded this train in 1947. I've been here ever since." Ethan couldn't believe it. "That's impossible." The old man slowly lifted his head. His eyes glowed with a strange blue light. "Time doesn't move inside train 417. It only moves outside." Ethan looked around the engine room. Thousands of old pocket watches hung from the ceiling. Every one of them showed a different year. 1947, 1965, 1989, 2003, token 23, 2043. The engineer pointed toward one final clock. It had no numbers. Its hands were spinning backward. When that clock stops, the train disappears forever. Suddenly, the engine let out a deafening roar. The entire room shook violently. Red warning lights flashed. A mechanical voice echoed through the speakers. "Destination updated." Final stop. The beginning. Ethan froze. "The beginning?" The engineer slowly handed him an old brass key. It was engraved with a single number. 17. This key opens only one door. The door that should never be opened. Before Ethan could ask another question, the engine suddenly screamed. Steam exploded from every pipe. The floor cracked beneath his feet. Then, a child's voice echoed from deep inside the locomotive, softly, almost like a whisper. "Ethan, hurry before the train remembers you." The lights instantly went out. Everything became silent, except the sound of someone slowly walking toward Ethan in the darkness. To be continued. The footsteps grew louder. 1, 2, 3. They stopped just behind Ethan. He turned around. No one. Only darkness. Then, the brass key in his hand began to glow. The number 417 shimmered in blue light. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the engine room. Access granted. The far wall slowly split open. Behind it, a massive steel door appeared. Unlike every other door on the train, this one had no handle, only a keyhole. Above it, someone had carved 4 chilling words. "Do not open twice." Ethan's heart raced. The old engineer whispered, "If you open that door, you'll learn why the train chose you." With shaking hands, Ethan inserted the brass key. Click! The lock turned. The heavy door slowly opened. Inside, there wasn't another room. There was another train. An identical train, 417. Perfectly still. Perfectly silent. Every light inside was on. Ethan stepped aboard. The air felt strangely warm. Every seat was occupied. All 186 passengers were sitting exactly where they had been on October 17th, 2003. Families, children, business travelers. Everyone looked alive. Everyone smiled as if nothing had ever happened. "Ethan!" a familiar voice called. He looked up. His younger sister, Emma, waved from seat 18. She had died in a car accident years before 2003. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "Emma!" He rushed toward her. She smiled gently. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan froze. What do you mean? Emma looked toward the front of the train. He'll wake up. The lights suddenly flickered. Every passenger stopped smiling. Slowly, one by one, they all turned their heads toward Ethan at the exact same speed. Their eyes became completely black. The train fell silent. Then all 186 passengers spoke together. You opened the wrong door. The windows shattered. An icy wind roared through the carriage. The entire train violently shook. Emma slowly stood. Her smile disappeared. She whispered, "Run before the conductor finds you." At that exact moment, a long shadow appeared at the end of the carriage. Someone was slowly walking toward Ethan, holding a glowing lantern and a ticket punch. To be continued. The shadow slowly moved closer. Step, step, step. The glowing lantern illuminated the dark carriage. It was the conductor. But he no longer looked human. His uniform was old and torn. His skin was pale like stone. His eyes glowed an unnatural blue. In his right hand, he carried the old ticket punch. Every click echoed through the silent train. Click, click, click. The 186 passengers remained perfectly still, watching Ethan, waiting. The conductor finally stopped, only a few feet away. He smiled. "Mr. Carter, you finally opened the correct door." Ethan tightened his grip on the brass key. "What is this place?" The conductor looked around the carriage. "This draw is where forgotten journeys wait." He slowly pointed toward the passengers. "They're not dead. Why? They're not alive. Oh, they're simply waiting, Dr. Moore." Ethan looked at Emma. She silently shook her head, as if begging him not to listen. The conductor reached into his coat. He pulled out an old leather passenger ledger. Its pages were yellow with age. He opened it. Every missing passenger's name was listed. Then Ethan saw something impossible. The final page contained only one name. Ethan Carter. A textile. Below it, one empty line. The conductor handed him a fountain pen. "Sign your name, Boem, and the train will remember you forever." Ethan stepped back. "What happens if I don't?" The conductor's smile slowly disappeared. The train chooses another passenger. Chaos. Suddenly, the entire carriage trembled. Every clock inside the train began spinning wildly. The windows filled with blinding white light. A loud mechanical announcement echoed overhead. Timeline collapse detected. 3 minutes remaining. The passengers finally moved. One by one, they slowly stood from their seats. Without making a sound, without blinking, all 186 people began walking toward Ethan. Emma was the only one who stayed where she was. She looked at Ethan with tears in her eyes, then whispered, "Go to the engine before he closes the book." The conductor snapped the ledger shut. His glowing blue eyes locked onto Ethan. Then he calmly said the words that made Ethan's blood run cold. "You were never chosen by the train. You built it." The lights exploded into darkness. The last thing Ethan heard was the sound of the conductor's ticket punch. Click. Darkness swallowed everything. Only one sound remained. Click! The conductor's ticket punch echoed through the train. Then, silence. Ethan slowly opened his eyes. He was back inside the engine room. The old engineer was gone. The giant engine had stopped beating. Every clock hanging from the ceiling was frozen, except one. The clock with no numbers. Its hands had stopped. The mechanical voice returned. Final station reached. The entire train shuddered. Outside the engine window, Ethan saw something impossible. There were no mountains, no tunnel, no tracks, only an endless railway floating through a black sky filled with stars. At the end of the tracks stood a lonely station. Its old wooden sign read, "The last station." The train came to a gentle stop. The doors opened by themselves. Ethan stepped onto the platform. No wind, no sound, only silence. An old station clock showed 9:15 p.m. The exact time Train 417 had departed Chicago 20 years earlier. Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke behind him. "You made it." Ethan turned. The conductor stood there, but this time he looked completely human. No glowing eyes, no terrifying smile, only sadness. The conductor quietly removed his hat. "My real name is William Harper. I was the engineer of the very first Train 407. He looked down the endless tracks. "I tried to save my passengers. I failed. The train became trapped between time itself." Ethan asked quietly, "Then why me?" William smiled sadly. "Because you're the only passenger who never gave up." He handed Ethan the old passenger ledger. "Every name inside this book is waiting for one thing, to be remembered." Ethan slowly opened it. The final blank page was still there, but now the pen had disappeared. Instead, a single sentence slowly appeared on its own. "The journey ends when the last passenger chooses to leave." At that moment, all 186 passengers stepped onto the platform. Families reunited. Children laughed. Friends embraced each other. Emma walked toward Ethan. She smiled. "You did it?" One by one, the passengers began fading into soft white light, not disappearing in fear, but finally going home. The old station slowly vanished. The endless railway crumbled into light. William Harper nodded one last time. "Thank you." Then he disappeared. Ethan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was standing outside Black Ridge Tunnel. Police officers surrounded him. Helicopters filled the sky. The date on a nearby police car read, October 18th, 2003. The rescue teams stared at Ethan in disbelief. Behind him, Train 417 slowly rolled out of the tunnel. Every one of the 186 passengers stepped off safely. Not one had aged. Not one remembered what had happened. The mystery of Train 417 was finally over, or so everyone believed. As Ethan walked away, he reached into his jacket pocket. Something was inside. The old brass key engraved with one number, 417. Then, far in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the mountains, even though there were no tracks.